Hello and welcome to That Ain't Meta. Today we're going to be talking about Japanese Spider-Man.
Spider-Man. The greatest. The greatest
Oh,
version
you
of
mean the
Spider-Man.
one that inspired all the Sentai series and Transformers?
Yeah.
Now we'll get to that.
That was awesome.
But yeah, it was first aired in 1978. And it slapped!
Yeah, if you guys haven't seen that, what was it called? Marvel 6 something?
601, some or other on Disney Plus.
Yes.
Like, yeah, they do a whole bunch of like different it's like a docu-series kind that goes over different topics. And the first episode was Japanese Spider-Man, and that's what we just got done watching.
Mm-hmm.
And we learned the whole history about it, and like the influences it had, how it was developed, how it came to be, and all that. And it was really cool.
Yeah, it was really eye-opening being, somebody who enjoys, or somebody who was a kid who grew up watching, Power Rangers, Transformers, and also enjoying, the superhero stuff, and coming to learn that the Japanese version of Spider-Man influenced a lot of that stuff, and it's kind of like, whoa, really?
Everything is interconnected.
Yeah.
It all makes sense now.
It was just cool because like it really it delved into the cultural differences on how action films were made and the differences in comic book structure and how like they said like comic books are meant to be read, whereas manga was meant to be looked at or seen.
Yeah.
And I was like that was like I never thought of it that way. But then reading manga now, you'll have like huge panels with like 3 lines.
Yep. And it's just
Yeah.
a big piece of art that looks really nice.
Mm-hmm. Granted, comics have gone a long way as far as going towards that too, in the past few years. But it was just very interesting, like just that distinction I never thought about. So that was kind of cool learning about that.
Mm-hmm.
And Gene was the guy who headed the production of Japanese Spider-Man, and like it was really cool like talking about how he kind of like he threw his whole life into it. He's like it's all or nothing, and he like gave up his job and his house and everything to like for this to work because like I guess
if it
like
failed, he lost his house
Yeah.
and whatnot. So literally,
Yeah.
this man would have been gone.
Well, it's like what was he, a businessman, and like he would frequent Japan a lot, and but
Something
he
like
also
that.
and like he also liked comic books or whatever. So like on a whim,
What was it called? Like he admired Stan Lee, so he wanted to like do something, and that's kind of what came about. Was hey, your comics aren't selling here, so we're gonna call up Marvel. You're like, hey, you can get some business here.
Yeah, being a comic book buff, he called up Marvel on a whim and said, "Hey, your comic books are not selling in Japan. Why is that?" And like, I can make it happen for you or whatever. And I was like, dang. And then he got like an interview with freaking Toei. And I was like, what the heck? Like business was done very differently back then too. He touched upon like how in Japan at that time it's like you didn't go to an office and talk about contracts and stuff. You went and you went for a drink.
Restaurant, bars.
Yeah,
whatnot.
a drink and a handshake. And that was it. And I like what he said. He's like, you can't tear up a handshake. I was like, damn, it kind of hit different.
I wonder if they would have at some point just been like, you know what, this ain't gonna really work, and just kind of like negated it if it was an actual contract instead of just a good word.
I think there's a difference in culture though. In Japan, like
Because remember,
yeah.
they also spoke on that where it's like they take pride in what they do. It's not really about like the money and stuff. It's just about like.
I mean, it's about the money, but it's also about like it's like about your honor as a man or as a businessman. And it's like no, we don't break stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
like because it look bad on me as a person, and they value that above a lot of things. So it was really cool, and like learning how like it developed and like how its budget was super duper small. So like they would use like action figures and toys sometimes in scenes, and it rocks. It looks so awesome. Like it's so cheesy and campy that it was like perfect.
Yeah, it's that perfect amount
Even
of
Stan
entertainment.
Lee agrees that it's perfectly campy.
Yeah, it reminded me of like hearing stories about like horror sets, because horror movies are always low budget, but like how people always seem to get along for all those like slasher movies on sets. It reminded me, like hearing them talk about the Spider-Man set reminded me of that. And I think that's really interesting where if you're just kind of doing it out of enjoyment and out of just like your joy of acting and being on screen, and two, just, you know, having fun with all the people you're with and caring about what you're doing, just goes to show that you can have fun and still make something that's big and impactful.
Yeah, like they're like living their lives.
Yep.
You know, and it was really cool. Yeah, like just hearing about like they weren't getting paid a lot, but they were just so enthralled about being on TV and like being in the show that they took it very seriously despite not being paid well. And I was like, wow, that's real actor shit right there. I was like, damn. So like it turned out to be like to me like it's really good. Like I was just seeing the scenes and I was like, this is so cool. Like,
especially for the time, the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's really good stuff.
There's mostly, it's like not even mostly, it's all just actual stunts.
No CGI, all
Dangerous
stunts, very dangerous stunts, no harness or anything.
Yeah, like they talked about how they bought time to work at Tokyo Tower, and they told the stuntman who was Spider-Man, he's like, all right, climb it. And it's like, oh, okay, how? Like, he's just climb it. No harness or anything. So you literally had to climb up like 40 meters with nothing.
Very sketch, but you know what? It's got to be made. It's got to be made.
It's like, yeah, you can't do that nowadays.
I was like, yeah, you know, he could have died multiple times, but it was so cool seeing the scenes though. Like, and Stan Lee touched on it, like talking about, it's like, wow, seeing him doing these things, climbing these walls, like he's like, this is like a real comic book without the use of CG. And I was like, that's so, the concept is so cool. It's just real humans doing.
Yeah.
Like, that just rocks.
It's really weird when you compare it to the modern Marvel movies now, and it really is, they don't take themselves too seriously, but they do take themselves a lot more seriously than this show did. And it really does, it's weird seeing how it doesn't have that same camp factor.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe Spider-Man 3.
Yeah.
The Sam Raimi movie.
Yeah.
But,
there's a balance to be had. You know? Like, it was nice, like, how, like, they would also, like, emphasize, like, teaching a lesson to children. Like, they said, like, children interactions were, like, one of the most important parts of the show.
mm-hmm.
And, like, making sure, like, they were teaching lessons and reaching that audience and showing them how to become better people. And I was like, damn, that's real Spider-Man right there. Because that was, like, Stan Lee's biggest thing with Spider-Man was his relatability. That anyone can put on the mask and be Spider-Man.
That's
that was the thing.
What was it? The guy that had the main role, he was talking about that when he first saw the original Spider-Man movie. It was like, when he was sneezing, he was like, it's human. Like, he has allergies just like me. Like, it's human, but, like, he has powers and whatnot, so, like, I can do this.
Yeah, which is, like, yeah, that's been Spider-Man's shtick, was always, anyone can be Spider-Man, you know? Like, that was always his thing. And, like, it was cool seeing that done really well in, like, that Japanese style of film, like, filmography.
Mm-hmm.
It was just so cool. Like, I don't know, like, again, like, I love the Sentai stuff, even some of the older Sentai stuff. So, like, seeing that, like, in the same vein, with, like, the monster of the week growing big, with the Zord or the giant robot fighting him at the end, and like his car, and like this shit was so awesome. Like, I was like, man, all the stuff I love about like Sentai and Power Rangers is there. And then they hit us with near the end. They're like, oh yeah, they were the first to do it. And then Sentai started doing that after that. I'm like, what? So you're telling me Spider-Man was the reason we had Megazords? Was the reason we had, like, all this crazy stuff in Transformers and transforming?
I think it's the most bizarre thing is that, like, that was the first time, like, transforming and morphing was a thing.
Yeah, now it's
so you had Power Rangers morphing. You had Transformers transforming. Like, those whole series and what they're based off of came from Spider-Man, an American thing.
Yeah.
Which is so bizarre to think about.
It's very, very strange to think about. Like, and like, it's strange that this is the first we've ever heard of that.
Yeah.
Like, what? You know, like you'd think that this would be a very a touched upon part of like Japanese culture, but you rarely ever hear about it. It's very interesting though. Like I was like, damn, no wonder. Like, I was like, no wonder this happens like this. I was like, oh, like I always had thought that Japanese Spider-Man was this way because of Sentai, but it was the other way around.
Yeah.
So I was like, whoa.
Like just thinking about that, like if there was no Spider-Man, imagine a world where you're on your PS3 and you don't get to play War for Cybertron or anything because that didn't exist.
I think it would have happened eventually, just because that's how Japanese culture was. Like they just loved the robots, but
the
it
transforming
would have
and whatnot.
it would have taken a long time to happen instead.
Exactly.
And I'm like, wow, man, it's so cool. Like,
Yeah,
because that's what he was also saying is like you want. When they were designing toys, because that was the whole point of it, was to market toys and sell toys and make profit for the show. Is that like he wanted to make something different and like really cool, and that's what he thought about like transforming and like morphing and whatnot.
Yeah.
And so that's how that came to be, and it just kind of spiraled and forward. You know, many years later, now we watching Transformers on the big screen.
Mm-hmm.
We're playing the games.
Yeah.
We got the little action figures, whatnot. We have all this stuff.
Like how like he said, like, did anyone question you making it a Sphinx instead of a spider? He's like, nah. I was like, that rocks. Like, I was doing something creative and I just made it, and I'm like, that's awesome.
That would have been. It sounds like it would have been a lot of fun. Like all those people just had so much creative liberty.
Yeah.
Like it didn't really matter what it turned out to be, as long as it like just had Spider-Man. He had the suit, and he shot webs and climbed on walls. And then it was like, all right, do whatever you want with the rest of it. Don't care.
Marvel was very hands off, like saying, you know, like if the paychecks are coming in, whatever. You know, it was just like it was so cool that like. Even, like, the actors just talking... Like, I don't doubt it was hella stressful. Considering they're like, yeah, we would film 2 episodes in 1 week. I'm like, what? To save on budget, because it was so small. But, like, whenever, like, the actors were just talking about their experience, like, there's just, like, always smiles on their faces. And, like they seemed so, like, happy talking back on their memories from the filming.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, that's so awesome. Like, such a positive experience from working on it. And, like... how progressive the show was with like its female role, like being in because like apparently in Japanese media at the time, female embarrassment was the main shtick, like well like the female is clumsy or whatever, or like a damsel in distress, or like again like the embarrassment factor. But then this person, finally like I guess the love interest of Spider-Man in this, was more like driven and flirty and confident while still clumsy and all that. So like. Apparently women loved seeing that. Seeing more of them on the screen. And I was like, dang! For a 1970s production of an American cartoon, that's pretty progressive.
Yeah,
that
I thought
rocks.
that was really cool is the fact that like they actually like took action, like especially like Japan, because that's like still an issue, you know, going on in today's time.
Yeah.
But like the fact that they tried to make it relatable to both sides. Yeah. And you know, they made a equilibrium area, equal point value, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
So it just kind of touched up on the fact that like, you know, it was not seen as like appropriate. So that show wanted to show that side, the side that like that should be natural, that should be of consideration when you like talk and whatnot, like that people aren't perfect. And I really did enjoy hearing about that, especially in, you know, the 70s in Japan.
Yeah, and what better way to show it than a superhero show? So.
Well, that was astounding. The fact that it was also a kids show.
Yeah.
So like that was even more unheard of. You know, like people like usually they just didn't give a shit about any of that for a kids show. It's like just put the action in, and beat the monster.
Put it on for your kids.
Oh, we did it, kids. That's it. Like you know, and they would eat it up. But they actually had lessons and like emotion, and stuff like that. Like him talking about that last scene and about his like. How he had lost his dad before he got the gig of Spider-Man, and like he had like
he improvised the scene.
Yeah, where his dad in the show died, and like he got to improvise that and kind of let it out then, and then he talked about how at the end of the series he got to like say like he finally did it looking out in the sunset. He's like, I wish my dad could have seen that. And I'm like, wow, man, this is emotional. Like, ugh. Spider-Man hits different no matter what form like it's in. And, like, it doesn't matter if it's an American form or it's like Hispanic or if it's Japanese. Like, Spider-Man's Spider-Man. And like I think that's what hit home for me. I'm like, damn.
I don't really know the quoting from the Spider-Verse when Peter Parker dies with Amit or whatever her name is. It's like, anyone can be under the mask, just like you. And I was like, that's me.
Well, that's
I don't think that's she actually means that literally.
Well, that's a catchphrase. Well, yeah, that's a catchphrase Stan Lee had. Was, yeah, anyone can wear the mask. That's Spider-Man's thing. Like, so like it was just so cool seeing that applied in Japan.
Yeah.
I was like, bro, that's so cool. And like how like when they finally showed a pilot to like the executives, they were fake as shit, and they're like, this ain't gonna sell here. Oh, yeah. Well, obviously you're thinking of it as an American, and the Japanese market's different. But Stan Lee was like all for it, and he's like, this is so different that it's awesome, and like how open he was. Granted, that was just the kind of man he was.
Yeah.
But it was super cool, and then like all of a sudden the directors and stuff were like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. And I'm like, man, fuck you.
Fake ass bitches.
I think it's really interesting talking about Stan Lee and just like his above and beyond passion for everything he did was incredible, and just how open he was, just doing things to entertain people and be creative and have fun.
Yep, but also to give like great messages and to be progressive. I mean, like he literally invented the X-Men to touch on racism and immigration and stuff. Like that was the whole point. That's what like why there are mutants and they're they're like harassed, subjugated, and stuff like that. Like it's touching on that. Hence Magneto's backstory being a victim of the Holocaust. Like it's like a lot of that. Like a lot of that. It's like, man, Stan Lee really went above and beyond to like talk about social issues. He was up in front as part of the Civil Rights Union talking about like how to be a good person. And so I'm like, man, he was the man. You know, so sad he passed away in the recent years. I was like, ugh, I wish I could have met him at a con. You know,
would have been great.
He's just so cool.
Yeah, I think one of the things that stood out to me watching clips from that old Spider-Man series was seeing the influence of stuff like Devilman, like those old mangas in that. Like when Spider-Man's just like, I'm an emissary from hell, and it's like, that is such a cheesy Devilman one-liner straight out of that manga. And seeing, I don't know, it was cool seeing that influence, having read that recently.
Now, and also, you know, just the fact that that quote is very dark for Spider-Man on a kid's show.
Yeah. And it's funny because Devilman was the opposite, where the manga was really, really edgy and, you know, adult and violent. And then they made the anime and it was made for kids and it was super duper toned down. That was kind of goofy thinking about that.
Yeah, it was just like very like eye-opening when it came to a lot of things. I was just like, wow, this is so cool. Why did it take till now to like figure some of this stuff out? I was like, dang.
Yeah. Going forward, I hope they do more with it and reference it, because I think it'd be great if you just had like this really cheesy Godzilla versus Spider-Man spin-off, because they're both technically Toei. So just like go for it, just make this really cheesy, you know, action movie.
Yeah, freaking Marvel.
That's if they still have the rights, though.
That's true.
They might have canceled that or whatnot because of Toei stopping production on it.
That is true.
Who knows, bro? I mean, we could get.
What I do want to see is I want to see Japanese Spider-Man, Spider-Verse 2, which there is some talks. It's getting made. It's happening.
I'm pretty sure it was confirmed.
It was confirmed.
Well, yeah,
like,
it's
like
confirmed.
the year
But
after
now we have
came out.
production and whatnot. So that's kind of hype, and it's gonna be censored. Or I think this is like the first live action screening of where it's gonna be emphasized and focused on Miguel, which is $20.99, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, that suit is so cool.
That
suit is so fire.
We first saw that in
Dimensions.
Shattered Dimensions.
Shattered Dimensions, yeah. So cool.
Which was the original Spider-Verse, kinda.
Yeah.
I love a solo Spider-Man noir film.
I want to see, what is it? Is it the Amazing one where he has like the coat on, the blue coat where he's like cartoony, like he's cell shaded?
I don't remember.
think so.
I don't know about the coat, but yeah, the Amazing Spider-Man is the one that was slightly more cel-shaded with the darker blue hues and the reds.
And then Amazing Spider-Man was the teenager Spider-Man with the symbiote. Which was that was cool. I like that. Like, I don't know, I think Spider-Man just
Kraven the Hunter, bro.
Spider-Man is just like, to me, he's my favorite hero.
Yeah.
It's because for me, like, all of his stories involve him growing in some way. Like, no matter what villain it is or what the situation is, he's always like forced to grow and make decisions. But I feel like a lot of other characters in comic books don't really have to make. Like, Captain America fights Nazis, and that's kind of it in the comic books until you get like further along in the timeline.
Yeah.
And Hulk is just like, I mean, Hulk is kind of different because there's a lot of stuff between like Hulk and Bruce Banner and depression and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Then you have like Superman, and it's just
perfect.
He's just perfect. And then Wonder Woman is kind of like Superman but female for a little bit. But Spider-Man is always like, oh, I have to, kill my best friend,
really
or
fast.
I have to kill my best friend's dad, or I have to
pay my rent while I'm not really making a lot from a part-time job, while I'm still saving the city and going to school and balancing my whole fucking life. Like,
hey, my uncle died, and I have to deal with that.
Yeah.
And I have to hide my secret identity from all the people that I love and care about, while also rescuing them like every other 2 minutes.
It's a lot, but like it's so relatable to real life. It's like, man, Spider-Man is the real life superhero.
Yeah.
He's not like the strongest or like craziest either.
Yeah, I think he's probably the easiest to write in terms of just like actually giving him a challenge.
Yeah, because he's just human.
Yeah, his super strength only goes so far. Where like Superman or like Batman is just like, oh, I'm prepared for every situation. And if I'm not, then I have some sort of, I'm smart enough to figure out a way out of it anyway. So
Spider-Man has definitely had its ups and downs as far as stories. I mean, just like who's helming the writing position. So but yeah, there have been some shitty Spider-Man stories. But
yeah. I mean, even Spider-Man 3, as cheesy as that movie is, there's still that subplot of him coming to terms with like, oh yeah, Sandman killed my uncle, but that doesn't mean I get to kill him because that's just not a good thing to do. And there's still that, and there's always layers to Spider-Man, which I always find interesting.
Yeah, he's again like he's probably also had one of my favorite superhero games too. Just helps. Like that narrative and like you can write him grown up or still in high school and like it works.
Yeah. And then there's Spider-Verse, which is
probably one of the best animated superhero films ever.
If not one of the best just movies ever made. Period.
Yeah, it was just well
like written. It's just there's just so much good in it. There's just so much good.
It's representation without forcing it down your throat. Yeah. It's like
you can watch it multiple times. It's still good, and like for me, that's hard because like usually I just hate repetition. Like that's my pet peeve is I can't do one thing or have one thing over and over and over again. That movie though is just it's flawless. There's like little to no flaws in that movie, so I can just walk it from beginning to end and just enjoy it as a whole. There's not one scene or anything in particular where I'm like, man, they could have changed this. This could have been a little bit better. No, it's just, I like it as it is. It's phenomenal.
Yeah. I remember one of the things that like definitely helped with that movie, at least for me, was it was a very good surprise. Because I remember seeing the trailers and I was just like, it looks alright.
Yeah, I was like, what's this gonna be?
Yeah, because I wasn't really familiar with Miles Morales at all at the time.
That and all they were showing were like the really flashy like comic book imagery type stuff. They weren't showing any of the action or storytelling of it.
Yeah, and I was like, this animation looks kind of iffy at first, but then when you go and you see it,
it's like a Marvel, bro.
Yeah.
No pun intended.
It flows flawlessly together. That and like just the way they were thinking on the movie, like, oh, Miles needs to become Spider-Man, but he doesn't know how to be Spider-Man. So when he's like swinging, they pay attention to the frame rate, and like he's not quite fluent yet, so he's not quite the speed at which the regular Peter Parker goes, because he's perfect, or not really perfect, but he's, you know, normed to it. And then he, as time progresses on and he gets used to it, then the frames start catching up and they are in sync now. Like, you have to think about that. Like, that's not something you just do. You're like, okay, I'm just gonna go ahead and do this.
Yeah, they definitely wanted to show love for the character.
Yeah.
And that shows.
It's like it's just cool seeing like how Spider-Man has influenced so much, and like again watching the Japanese Spider-Man kind of like documentary, it was like it kind of like hit home with that too. It's like Spider-Man's always affecting something. Like he's just that all encompassing, and like I guess that's why he's one of the most revered superheroes. You know, I mean he's definitely one of my favorites, if not my favorite now. Especially like as I get older, like I'm like especially relating to his when he's written older, like like relating to his story, like I'm like this feels like my superhero, and then look at Miles and stuff, like culturally it makes sense too. But you know,
he just always is really easy to relate to.
Yeah. The point of the story, moral of the story: Spider-Man rocks.
Spider-Man is the GOAT.
Mm-hmm.
Whether he's American or Japanese.
Yeah,
or anything, Indian Spider-Man, because that's also a thing.
Is it?
Yeah, isn't
Bollywood Spider-Man?
Not Bollywood Spider-Man, but
I
I'm
would
pretty sure
pay
he's
to
like
see
his
that.
own thing. He has like his own garb and suit.
Spider-Man the musical.
There's a UK Spider-Man. Spider-Man UK.
Yeah, I know that. But yeah, if you haven't gone to see it, go and if you have Disney Plus, check it out in the Disney. It's
if not,
Disney
you can also watch just the episodes of the Japanese series online, because they are online.
So
if you're
41 episodes, baby.
If you're a fan of Super Sentai,
You probably love it, yeah. Same style.
Remember, this was made in the 70s, so it's not going to look the greatest. It's not
it
going to be
doesn't
the
look
greatest.
terrible.
It doesn't look terrible.
But
for what it is.
It will satisfy you.
Yeah, but
if that's what you're craving.
But yeah, give it a watch. But yeah, we'll be back with the normal full crew after this. But with that, signing off, Spider-Man.
Hasta luego.
Yep.